Radio Vermont, WDEV, takes no responsibility for the opinions or statements made by the House Calls Vermont show host or their guests. The information provided during the House Calls Vermont show is offered only as a public service and should not be used as a substitute for obtaining any professional advice from a licensed professional.
Our house in the middle of our streets. Our house in the middle of our...
WDEV presents House Calls Vermont. Hosts Jim Bradley and Chris West share their knowledge and expertise on topics specific to the opportunities and challenges of building and renovating in Vermont. Our program brought to you by Hannon Home Center, Mason Drive in Waterbury. By Shamrock Painting, painting and custom wood finishing, shamrockpaintingcompany.com. RK Miles, your neighborhood lumberyard with new locations in Barrie, Montpelier, St. Johnsbury, and Waitsfield. Sticks and Stuff and Swanton Lumber with locations in St. Albans, Enosburg, Swanton, Derby, and Middlesex. Curtis Lumber, there's a Curtis Lumber near you. Find out where at curtislumber.com. By Matt Clark's Northern Basement Solutions for all things basementy. NorthernNEFoundations.com. By Vermont Home Builders and Remodelers Association. HomeBuildersVT.com. By Poly Construction in South Burlington. One call does it all. Online at polyconstruction.com. Your participation is encouraged. Call the listener line with questions at 802-244-1777 or toll free 1-877-291-8255. Now, House Calls Vermont with Jim and Chris.
Good afternoon, Vermonters and people from parts beyond. I'm Jim Bradley with my good friend and colleague Chris West here today.
How's it going, guys?
Chris, it seems like it was just 2 days ago that it was 2020, and here we are now in 2021.
Happy New Year, Jim. Happy New Year, Vermont. Happy New Year, everyone. Let's make this a better year than last year.
Yeah, well, definitely lots of opportunities on the horizon for everybody, and we're hoping that this show will prove informational to everybody as, when you're doing your home improvement projects and also your new construction projects. And should you have any calls or considerations that you want us to bring up, please give us a call at 802-244-1777 or toll free at 877-291-8255. But this week, what we're going to do is, some of these topics we get into regarding construction and building science and replacement of items tend to take a little bit more time because there's a lot of information there. And I don't know if you remember back in I think it was the 80s, they had the world's fastest talking commercial salesperson. We don't want to do that because you're going to lose a lot in the details. So what we want to be able to do is expound on some of these projects, give you opportunity to call in with your questions, and to make sure you're getting the most well-rounded bit of information for the different topics that we bring up.
I did get a comment from a friend of mine who was listening, and she said, I'm concerned that you guys are getting too technical and that people may not understand everything you're saying. And we know that. Part of the way that we interact with new information is that we put the information out there and then we repeat it and repeat it and repeat it so that something like the first condensing layer, which made no sense at all on week one when we said it, now some of you might even understand, the first condensing layer is the piece of wood in your wall that is below the dew point, and therefore, the vapor that's in the room that's going through your wall may condense there. That's great. And if we just keep on talking about it and answering your questions, we don't want to dumb everything down to the point which my friend was proposing that no new information can explain. No, we have a lot of faith that our listeners are good thinkers and intelligent, engaged. And you guys can figure out or ask questions if we're talking over your head. So let us know if there's if there's something that we put up there. Just remember, we're making all of these radio shows into videos, and on the videos I go in depth into explaining each of these concepts and graphics and text that fills in the gaps. So if you have a question, check that out first, and otherwise give us a call. We'll gladly explain anything. But I think that my friend was wrong. I think that we need to be slightly more technical than you'd expect in order for us to get good information out there.
Well, because when people are thinking of home improvement projects, a lot of times you're trying to improve the aesthetics of the home.
Right.
Oh, I want that brand new kitchen, that $50,000 kitchen or $20,000 whatever. But geez,
$5,000
well,
kitchen.
yeah, that's rare though. Believe me.
Taking some cabinets out. That's
sure,
all.
but if you're redoing something like that, well, what about giving some attention to I'm replacing my siding or I'm replacing my roof with a cathedral ceiling above? That's the time to look into these things and say, okay, has building science been adhered to, or are there latent problems behind the scenes that have to be addressed so that they don't come back? I mean, replacing things like in kind as they were found when they were deteriorated and rotting doesn't solve the problem just because, I put something new in there, because it could actually rot more quickly depending on the type of products that you're using. So selecting these things first and foremost right out of the gate as you have the opportunity, whether it's new construction, whether it's existing construction when you're renovating, is so vitally important. And so we'll say things, you'll hear some repetitive type of things over the shows, because not just because we're trying to make sure it sinks in, but also because so many of these elements tie into one another, because it's all about the science of the building as a system. As a whole system. So all these parts interrelate, just like they do inside your body, it does inside the home, and you have to give proper attention to the proper areas. But this week, going to that, we're getting back into Windows.
We're going to do Windows 2.
Windows 2, exactly.
It's back.
Not Windows 95, not Windows 8. We're doing
Windows 10. They stopped doing that, right? After Windows 10, they didn't keep on adding another number. Like, no, 10's a good number. We're sticking here. We'll just give you updates.
Exactly. But we're doing Windows 2.0 for the building science of Windows and how they should be looked at when you're going into your homes.
So where did we leave off, Jim?
I think we left off on some of the types of glass that were available. The single part or single pane glass, double pane glass, triple pane glass,
quadruple pane glass.
Yeah, just wait and see. But then also we were going in the different operations, the different operations of sash locks, counterweights, slides, rollers, guides, and nailing fins versus none. That's where we left off. But we were going to get into the different type of operations of Windows as far as what they actually, how they'll open and close.
So the most basic one is the fixed window, right? A fixed window has no operation. It doesn't open.
That's not the opposite of a broken window.
No. Fixed is that it doesn't have a way to open it anyway. If you have a window that oftentimes you'll see them in pairs, where you have a fixed window next to an operable window. That's a very common makeup these days.
It's called a picture window a lot of times.
Exactly. So a picture window is a good name for a fixed window. But we also have the classic double hung, right, where you can slide it up. That's the type of window that most window air conditioners go in, right? You move it up and then you pull the bottom part of the window back down to hold it.
Is it double hung a Czechoslovakian phrase for leaky? I'm not sure.
I don't know if it's Czech, but I'll check to see if it's Czech. So that's the classic double hung window, is what most people would recognize as an operable window. And in the 1970s and 80s, they said, well, let's make it easier for people to wash their windows. So they created this thing where you can tilt the window into your room so you can wash them. I have those. I've owned them for 8 years now. I've never washed them, but that's more me than the tilting window. The thing is that when you make a sash that allows for tilting, it becomes leakier than one that isn't. So all of these things that we're adding to a double sash window or a double hung window are inherently leaky. Anytime you have something sliding, that gasket just cannot be very good. It's just not as good as a picture window, right? A picture window doesn't have any place for air to get around. So what are the other designs, Jim, that the double hung? We also have the single hung, which is an extension of the double hung, where the top window is fixed and the bottom window is the only one that goes up and down, and that was to increase the air tightness of that type of window, but it's still a pretty leaky construction. And then we get into what the types of closable windows that have really good seals that we all know. We have our hoppers, our awnings, and our casements. And the only difference between those three windows is how they swing. A casement swings on either the right or left hinge and swings out like a door. A hopper is one that swings from the top. The top swings open, leaving the bottom hinged, and the awning obviously is that it's hinged on the top and swings out on the bottom. And those are the three types of swinging windows that we're used to in America. However,
well, just going back with that, or to finish Chris's thought, the other one is what's called a European tilt and turn style window, which actually has a dual operation. Now, keep in mind, when you have like a casement window, awning, or hopper, a lot of times those will crank to come into the open position, which means you have more hardware involved. And when they close, they usually close at 1 or 2 points. When you get a European style tilt and turn window, it has a dual operation, thus tilt and turn. So when you turn the handle in one direction, it also has at least 5 points of closure. So it really holds that sash tight instead of just 2 points. And so it keeps it from warping. Also, when the wind blows, it keeps air from pushing through. But you might have seen these in some of the bigger hotels in some of the bigger cities if you've had a chance to visit, or if you have friends that have a really high-performance home.
Or if you've been to Europe.
Or if you've been to Europe, you'll see this. And you turn the handle one direction, and it allows the glass actually to swing inward. You don't crank it. You just basically pull it inward, and then it opens wide open for you.
Like a door.
Like a door.
Yep.
And then on the other side of things, though, let's say you're trying to have a little bit better security, or you're just trying to minimize the airflow coming in, or you're trying to keep airflow moving, but it's raining outside. So it has the opportunity of, when you close the window, turn the handle another direction, and what it does is just the top of it tilts inward, and thus if any rain hits the sash on the glass, it'll just spill right off.
And it only tilts in like
outside.
6 inches.
Yeah,
So you're
not much.
creating a gap that allows air in, but is stopping bulk water from getting in, and allows you also not to have a fully open swung window, which, if you have small children,
Yes.
it can be an issue. There are ways to put child safety stops on,
Restrictors, yeah.
so that it's not a dangerous window if it's properly installed. However, the tilt and turns have really good seals. It's like Jim was saying, a 5-point seal. Once that window is sealed and closed, there's no air getting through that, or close enough to no air.
So right now we do have a call from Tim in Rochester. So Tim, please go ahead with your question.
Hey guys, I've been listening to you for a couple of weeks about the windows
Yes.
and,
Yep.
and the replacements.
Yes.
And
Yes.
maybe you've mentioned it, but I don't remember you mentioning it, that when you replace those older, especially apartment windows with the replacement windows, it takes up some room, and you've got to remember about the egress.
Yes.
Oh,
very
great
good point. Anytime you're going to be having a house that you're renting out, or is a commercial building, or anything that will not be just a single family house, and even some rooms in single family houses, you're required to have an egress, and that egress is 5.7 square feet. And so sometimes, and what Tim is pointing to, and thank you for bringing this up, Tim, is that if you start with a window that is already just big enough for egress, just that total area is 5.7, and you put a replacement window in, those replacement windows are usually smaller, so you may not be hitting your legal requirement for egress if you use a replacement window. You always have to make sure whatever window you're replacing with is going to maintain that minimum of 5.7 square feet.
And that's
of
clear.
egress. Yes,
So
clear.
that's not just the window is 5.7 square feet, but actually when the sash operates, when the glass moves out of the opening, that you have a clear opening of 5.7 square feet. Now with that, great point though, when you put a replacement window in, it does take up some of that
I just want to
space.
point out that the term replacement window doesn't mean just a window we're replacing it with. It's a type of window that is easier to install than ripping all the trim out. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, basically gets installed in the old frame of the previous window. So the old sashes get taken out, the tracks get taken out, and then this new stops get put in, and then this window slides in. So it looks like a pretty slick, elegant solution, but at the same time, you're encroaching upon the visible glass, you're encroaching upon the actual room that you have to get in, and at the same time, you're not getting to check about
How the old frame was installed.
Exactly.
Right?
Was it installed correctly? Is
Was
it
it-
being is there problems behind the scene like rot or whatever?
Proper air sealing, between the wall and the frame, all those things.
And
yeah.
a lot of times when these are going in, the only thing that's holding them in place are going to be the stops and some caulking,
Yep.
not additional flashing. And so that could actually be setting something up for a failure more quickly down the road than not. And Tim, was that something that basically helps you with that question, or was there something else? And I think that Tim actually went
Okay.
beyond.
Well,
So-
I'm glad we covered that. Thanks, Tim, for bringing that up.
Certainly.
And if you have another question in the future, please call us back in or send us an email at housecallsvt@gmail.com. And we're right up against a break, so we're going to go to a break. And when we come back, we'll continue with Windows, and we'll have, as usual, our friend Steve Spatz from Efficiency Vermont. So we'll see you in just a minute.
Welcome back to House Calls Vermont. I'm Jim Bradley with my friend here and colleague Chris West.
Hey, guys.
And if you have any calls regarding your home improvement projects, new construction questions on a house you're looking to build, or building science questions, please give us a call at 802-244-1777. And at this time, as with every Saturday, we have Steve Spatz from Vermont Efficiency. No, I'm kidding. Efficiency Vermont. And, part of the reasons why we have Steve on is because we're trying to increase more of the awareness of the resource, a valuable resource that Efficiency Vermont is to the actual Vermonters inside the state, as far as being a resource for contractors who are qualified, who understand building science, who understand construction, because they're thoroughly vetted by Efficiency Vermont and part of their network. And so, Steve, it's always a pleasure to have you on. And how are you doing today? Oh,
Steve?
We thought Steve was there.
Can you hear me?
There we go.
There we go, Steve.
Yep.
A little technical difficulties.
Happy New Year, Steve.
Hi, guys. Good to talk to you.
Yay.
New Year.
So, yeah, same to you, sir. And with that, we're talking again about Windows. And, we know that a lot of time the leader of what motivates people to replace their Windows is, there might be a little bit of leaking. There might be, we need to upgrade, or there's some rot. But usually people are looking for the lowest price point. We understand that. That's human nature. We're looking to get the best deal possible, especially if you're looking at replacing a house full of glass, which could be tens of thousands of dollars there.
Just in the windows.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but yet with that, if you could, Steve, as a contractor previous to Efficiency Vermont for yourself, what are some of the things that you would try to encourage your customers to consider when looking at new replacement or, replacement windows as far as new construction at the same time?
Well, when it comes to replacing windows, I guess you have to factor in what it is that you're really aiming for to get out of it, and consider what it is you may be willing to sacrifice in that process because of some of the things that you just mentioned. So, if you have an old house, historic home, and large old windows with, old glass in them and unique shapes and sizes, and really kind of adds to the aesthetic of the home, there may be considerations there to try to improve what you have already, make improvements to the window. Talk to a professional who has experience with repairing and modifying old windows, working with what you have already and trying to do some efficiency improvements there. When it comes to looking at your considerations with a newer home or something not quite that old, then you also, again, you're looking at considerations on maintenance, on durability when considering a window replacement, and thinking about material choice as well. So there's a broad range of performance from a vinyl window, an inexpensive box store vinyl window, up to an extruded fiberglass and wood high-end window. So there's a bit to learn, but there's a lot of great resources online. We have some good resources on our website to help guide people in thinking about the consideration of the windows and material choices. And as we talked about a couple weeks ago, the glass performance and the coatings on the glass make a big, make the primary difference on performance from a heat loss standpoint at this point.
One of the questions that came up, because I've heard this as a sales pitch when somebody is trying to sell people on a type of windows they should go with, that, oh my gosh, you're going to save 35% on your energy bills just by replacing the glass. I can see that being, maybe possible if you have the old farmhouse windows where the glass is falling out and you're patching that with cellophane and everything else. But when you actually have a solid assembly where maybe the R value with an actual storm window is still about 2.4, trying to tell them to upgrade to a window, a double pane type of modern unit that only has an R value of 3.4, that's not much of a change. It's really going to see that. I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Steve?
Yeah, precisely, and that's what I mean when you talk about, an old window. What are you willing to sacrifice, to replace an old historic window that you could put a good storm window over it and make some fixes to the glass and sash as it exists. Really considering what it would mean to replace that with a new window that really changes the aesthetic of the home. And when you do look at the bottom line for what the difference in actual, heat loss performance is, it's not a huge margin there. The bigger difference is when you're talking about a new home and your options.
Sure.
What options do you have available there?
Yeah.
At that point, you're making an investment, and you're making hopefully a 30 to 40 year, if not longer, investment. So at that point, you really should be weighing into account your best performance option you can within the budget.
Yeah, and those targets are moving, right? Right now, getting a good double pane Marvin, just a regular 3x4 kind of thing is going to cost you $600 or $700, maybe $800,
depending on the size.
Depending, 4 foot by by 3 foot, just a standard. And what we're starting to get is what we were hoping to get. What happened in Germany in the 1990s when they started putting a lot of effort into developing the Passfaust standard and looking at the building science of windows and other things, they created tens of companies that were making custom triple glazed tilt and turn windows with thermally broken frames, which is like the holy grail of windows. And now we have some companies in the United States who are starting to pop up, these small companies that can give you a custom window that has all of those boxes checked off: a thermally broken frame, high performance, triple glazed, an R7 or 8 window. And if you're building brand new, then that is a very good thing to consider putting very high on your list to invest a good amount of money into the windows, because they, like you said, those are going to be there for 30, 40, 50 years. And if you buy a not a very good window, then you're going to be living with that not very good window. And the comfort differences, yeah, exactly. Go ahead.
Well, I was going to say also, if you're investing into a good building envelope, building a new house as well, and you have a really high performing wall, framed wall with insulation in it, then if you get to a window opening and you go with a budget window, and you do have a high transmission of heat loss through that window, you're going to notice that. It's going to be a stark difference between being in an area of the room that has majority just wall with no windows in it, and the areas where you do have windows at that point. You'll notice definitely a comfort impact there.
Absolutely. Well, Steve, we're coming up against the clock again. I want to thank you for joining us again. It's always a pleasure to hear your thoughts on the various building science concepts we're working with. And if you could, as usual, I'm going to pass it to you for the website, for the Efficiency Vermont website.
EfficiencyVermont.com.
It couldn't be
You can
easier.
find lots of resources there. You got it.
Yeah, definitely. Well, thanks again, Steve, for joining us.
Well, good to talk to you.
Yeah,
same
you
here.
too,
All right,
and we'll
take
see you
care.
next week.
So right now we're looking also, one thing that Steve said, and this is really important, the windows are usually one of the weaker performing assemblies in your home with respect to the thermal loss possibilities. But you want them. You want the visible light transmission. You want to be able to bring in the sunshine, the
You
outdoors.
want the view.
Exactly. And so you've got to make sure that assembly is robust. Because right now, if you go with even some of the newer windows that aren't the high performance, but they are a good performing window, you're going to have an R value, which is going to be right around 3.4 per inch. And then that's the resistance to heat transfer. Now, your walls, though, you're building somewhere between an R25 to meet code all the way up to an R60. And so if you've got a really robust wall assembly, but then you've got a window that's performing at that lower standard, that's when, oh my gosh, it's just not going to do as well as it could. So that being said, though, we have seen some of the newer windows put in, the high-performance windows, into a wall assembly that was only 2x4 construction, terribly insulated. The window was a better performer or on par with the wall. But at the same time, there are not available, that are on the market today, the R60 windows or anything like that.
No, we're not there yet. We're getting close.
Yes.
We'll get into that in a minute. I did want to point out just a final point about new construction and using really good windows. Part of the design of, and we'll have a special radio show in a couple of weeks about Passive House and the high performance tier that Efficiency Vermont designed based on the Passive House standard. One of the reasons that we want really, really good windows is to get that inside surface temperature to the point where you're not feeling cold when you're standing next to it, even if there isn't a radiator under it, right? We usually put radiators under windows because they're not very good thermally, and so you're getting cold. So if we invest in a really good window, we can get rid of hydronic baseboard heat under the window, and that's a swap out overall.
Sure.
But that's why we call it Passive House. Some people are like, well, the passive. Well, Passive
Passive
House
solar.
means passive solar. We'll get into the misconceptions on that. But passive just means you don't have to add energy to it in order for it to do what you want it to do. If you have a radiator under a window and you bought a not a very good window and you're putting a radiator under it, or you could spend a little more on your windows and not have a whole radiator system to heat your windows, one of them uses energy the whole time to fix the design flaws, and the other doesn't. So that's where we go with that.
So let's say we're going to be looking at repairing windows. One of the things that Steve talked about was looking at the existing window and do I really need to repair it? The glass isn't falling out. It's still operating pretty well, but it's somewhat leaky because the weather stripping is failing. The sash locks aren't locking appropriately, and maybe it needs a little bit of touch up for some of the caulking and everything else, but overall it's pretty sound. And so what are some of the things you could possibly do? One thing I think we might have mentioned last time, but maybe if I did not, there's a service called Pickens. Yeah, Pickens window parts. They're online, and you can take a piece of your existing weather stripping from a certain manufacturer's product. I did it with a 40-year-old Anderson, and it went from a metal weather stripping to a vinyl, which was more robust, and I was able to take that window, keep it serviceable, and make it really tight again by sending off a piece of this to them. They send back to you their matching sample. You confirm that, tell them how many linear feet you want, and they're going to send you a bunch of weather stripping, and you can go ahead and replace that. Also, the sash locks are important. We've been in windows where you have the really old non-sash lock windows where they just have pins that hold the sashes in place, or they do have a sash lock but it's broken, or even the modern ones. You have these vinyl windows that they just have deformed over time because of solar exposure, and then or you put an air conditioner in the window.
Or you do what I do, which is you put your exhaust from your dryer blowing out. That window is so warped, I'm telling you. You can close it, but only when it's not freezing, because when it's freezing, it's too brittle. You just break the whole frame.
And once again, a sash lock isn't just for security, though that is one of the reasons why it's there. It's also to keep that seal on the weather stripping. It pulls the two sashes together and makes up that bond between the weather stripping. And so that's why it's really important that that is functional. But even some of the new ones I've seen install brand new windows on brand new houses, that's really tough to get some of those to lock. So getting that right on a sash lock is really important. You can also look at the fact of some of the guides on the windows. Like if you have a slider that goes left to right type of window, or you have a double hung window, and some of the springs that help take up some of the weight of the sash and make it easier to operate, some of those can break, or they can just not function well, or they can become out of alignment. But those can be repaired without having to replace the entire window, and thus save you a lot of money and allow you to invest some of those funds towards other components of the house for weatherization at the same time. But also you have some of the glass. Sometimes we'll see glass that's fogged over, Chris.
Yeah. So if you have a double pane window and you can't see out of the window because there seems to be fog between the glazing, between the two pieces of glass, that is because there's seal around the glass that is the connection between the glass, or the glazing as we call it, and the frame. That is ruptured, and the gas that was inside is no longer the only thing that's getting in there. You're getting room or outside air, and that air has moisture in it, and that moisture is condensing, and that's what's causing the fogging. And that can be replaced. There are a couple of companies here in Vermont. I believe it was Able
Paint, Acme Glass, Portland Glass, they'll do these things.
They'll come out, they'll measure it up, and they will give you a replacement package of glazing that will mean that the fogging won't be there anymore, and you're not replacing the frame at all, right? This is a straight up just swap of the glass, and as long as the frame and other things are in good shape, you can just keep using those windows, and it's a cheaper alternative.
But let's say you have identified the fact that there's not much life in that window, but you're still trying to save money. We would just try to dissuade you, if you can, to move away from just putting a simple replacement sash unit inside the existing frame. I know it's easier. I know it does save money up front, but it's not allowing you the opportunity to see what's behind the scenes. How was that window installed 10 years ago, 20 years ago, or more? And is everything sound? Because what if there is rot going on behind the scenes? What if there are other problems like mold or rodents? Or let's say you open up the window and you see rot, and you go a little bit deeper, you find the wiring and right underneath the window is compromised because of rodents. So a lot of things, you get a chance to investigate the house a little bit better.
They're
at that
kind
point.
of opportunities to check on the durability of things.
Yeah, and then if you do put one of those assemblies in there, like we identified earlier, the frame thickness is usually, not always, but usually going to encroach upon the visible light coming through the panes of glass. And so you lose a little bit there too. I know they're a good product, but if you put like a really great operating like blanket on, for the window, and yet around it is still leaky, the blanket's not going to work too well. So if you put a window that's a nice assembly that functions well, has nice glass, but the perimeter is leaky, not insulated, or whatever, then you bypass the investment that you just had installed. So that's why we would really be more prone to suggest going with a new construction window in an existing frame to allow you to install it right and inspect, and that way you can manage the assembly appropriately at the same time.
It gives you an opportunity to open up the window. You're not going to be... So when we're talking, right now we're talking replacement windows. Once again, that's between quotes, right? It's a type of window that is less expensive to install because there's less labor. You're not pulling all the trim out. You're not pulling the old frame out. And that will be sold as a great alternative to the more expensive deep energy bit where we're pulling the trim off and the frame out. We're putting a brand new construction window, which is what Jim means, right? And that is something that we're not really behind because it's a lost opportunity. You're going to be doing all that work anyway. You're going to be taking the trim off. You're going to be doing all that work. It's a good idea to use that opportunity because these are holes in our wall. Right, exactly. A window is a hole in the wall, and if the bulk moisture, which means just water, strategy for keeping the bulk water out for some reason failed over the last 20 years due to ultraviolet degradation, or just it wasn't installed right, or the caulking got old and cracked, that's the moment when you should grab the bull by the horns and get someone to not just sell you the cheapest, quickest option, but to do an investment that will be durable and will give an opportunity to check out what might be going on behind the scenes.
And so once again, as before we dive into this a little bit more deeply, please give us a call if you have any questions regarding windows or building science questions, your new construction, of your home type of questions.
You're hiring a contractor to do some work, and you're like,
exactly.
Do Jim and Chris agree with what they're proposing or not?
Exactly. So give us a call at 802-244-1777, and we'll put you on the air and see if we can answer your question for you. But, when we actually then go to replacing windows, there's some options out there, a lot of options, and they continue to increase, and there's a myriad of companies out there that are offering types of windows. So how, as a consumer, are you going to be best able to pick out what you should be looking for? So with that, some people will say, well, just like Steve said, go to the box store, get the cheapest vinyl window that's out there, and it's going to be susceptible to a lot of different things like temperature differentials. It's going to be susceptible to UV exposure. And so what happens is those type of frames over time, if it's not a UPVC frame,
it's just a straight up vinyl frame.
Yeah, just a regular vinyl, it's going to tend to warp. It's going to tend to deflect, especially in our temperature extremes that we have on a daily basis here in Vermont. And what that will happen, that will cause is for sash locks not to lock again, like we said, the guides to start to fail, sometimes the glass to start to lose, the glazing to loosen within the actual
air leakage around all kinds of bits.
Exactly.
Gets more with these vinyl windows as they age.
So Chris hit this on the head here when he said it's an investment, because this really is. This is an investment in your home, because not just that you want it as robust as possible and to last as long. You don't want it to last to the 1 day past the 10-year warranty. You want it to last, 30, 40 years. Exactly. And so making that investment up front, you can say, well, I'm going to sell my home in 5 years. But still, it's the right thing to do to be able to make that investment now and to make sure it's going to have longevity to it.
And if you are going to sell, then just increase the asking price to include the upgrade. That's what we should do anyway. We've got a call right now from Scott in Colchester. Scott, how can we help you today?
I've been listening to your show for a couple of weeks, and I find it very interesting and informative. And I just wanted to call to add my 2 cents. I've built 3 houses in 40 years, and I want to talk about foundation insulation and change course a little bit.
Sure.
And just my first house in 1980, all the rage for foundation insulation was your styrofoam on the outside, and I didn't really find that styrofoam on the outside really stopped the concrete from radiating heat. And so moving along to my second house, we built it the same way, styrofoam on the outside. And here again, it didn't really amount to what I thought. I still felt that concrete radiating cold. So my next house we built in 2018, the new technology was to use a product called Thermax on the inside to the foundation on the inside, and spray foaming the box sill.
Yep.
And I just wanted to tell you that that combination is is tremendous. It's awesome. I do have a zone of heat in my basement, and my cellar is unbelievably warm. My floors are extremely warm. It's just apparently it's a different school of thought, but that Thermax to the inside of the concrete and then the sprayed box fill have made a tremendous improvement in energy efficiency. That's all.
Thank you for calling with that. Yeah, I'm not sure. Just from my own point of view, because I'm a passive house designer, and we often try to put the insulation on the outside when possible. I'd want to know much more about exactly how you tied in, say, your wall insulation to the sub slab. Did you go around the footer? Did you tie that in with the insulation going up the outside of the wall? So those are questions I'd want to know.
There's no insulation on the outside of this foundation. The only insulation is 4x8 sheets on the inside of the basement wall, and they're basically...
That's with the Thermax, yes. Right. But I'm talking about the other buildings, the other ones, the contiguousness of those. Yep.
Yeah, my 1980 home, we put 8 feet from the, covered the entire outside of the foundation. So, and by 2000, or by 2009, my second home, they said, you only have to go down 5 feet with the foam on the exterior below the frost line. But just my opinion now.
No, absolutely.
No, and granted, that's the big thing too. When we ask somebody,
how many inches?
Sure. How many inches were there? But also, what you have is you got to look at the site-specific conditions too, because if you have a lot of hydraulic pressure from the outside water, groundwater, pushing against the assembly, and you use like an EPS or an XPS, especially an XPS, because XPS is the blue board, your pink board, whatever. And after yesterday, you can't even use that legally in the state of Vermont because it has now been banned because of the blowing agents. Now, there's going to be replacements out there. I know DuPont is making one called Beyond Blue, and it's going to be there. But the problem with this is it takes up water slowly, but after 10 years, we have found that this will actually have at least an inch of water in the assembly in certain conditions.
In the insulation.
Then when your insulation gets wet, it flip-flops from an insulator to a conductor.
Right.
And so thus it's going to make it colder inside there. So when you put insulation to the outside, I think Chris is correct. If you can stop the cold before it comes in, great. But you also have to make sure that what you're putting on there is continuous or contiguous all the way around the assembly. So it's tying in from the footer to the underneath of the slab to up above into the wall insulation. Yeah, exactly. So it's all continuous, because if you have a weak point anywhere, it's going to allow that cold to chase in. There's a program that is used called Therm, and it's a modeling program that'll show you just how that's happening. So people think, I've got insulation on the wall, I've got insulation on the concrete, but somewhere there could be a definite weak point that basically circumvents the assembly. So you have to make sure everything is there, but you also have to make sure there's water protection and protection on the insulation from damage. And so if it gets damaged, weed whacked a lot or whatever, it's not going to perform as well. But in retrofit situations, what you described for your new construction, putting that Thermax, which is actually a fire-rated material, can be left exposed and doesn't have to have an ignition barrier. We're putting that on walls and then also tying it into the box sill. And I was just speaking to a client today on the way in about the very same process.
You're working on Saturday?
Well, it was just more so a consulting type of thing. I wasn't doing the work, but it was a consulting. But we were doing that, and that assembly does end up providing a lot of comfort and a lot of,
So the assembly you came up with the Thermax on the inside tying into the box shell spray foam is our go-to for almost any retrofit and with a lot of new builds. I was wondering, on the first two houses, how many inches of EPS did you put on the outside?
A 2-inch.
Okay, so when we're doing high performance houses or passive houses, which is the type of designing that I have been doing, we go to 5 and 6 and 7 inches. So 2 inches is an R8 on the outside, which is going to give you, so insulation doesn't stop heat flow, it just slows it down. Yeah. So the more insulation you have, the slower that heat loss from the inside to the outside would be. So that would be one of the things I'd consider. I think you came up with a great solution for your new house, and we would go with that in most retrofit situations. So well done, and
tremendous floors are warm, basement's warm, no mildew smell.
That's great.
Nice dry basement.
Well done.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for your information. I just
thanks, Scott.
Throw that out to you, and thank you. Your show is great.
Thank you,
definitely.
Scott.
So right now, I believe we're up on a break, and so right after that, we're going to come back and we're going to be talking about different window types as far as the composition of the window frames and
There's
such.
more about windows?
There's so much more, and so. But anyway, if you have any questions in the meantime, feel free to give us a call at 802-244-1777, and House Calls Vermont will be right back. Welcome back to House Calls Vermont with Jim Bradley and Chris West.
Chris West.
Yeah, there we go. And so if you have any calls, once again, regarding your home improvement projects, new construction questions, or even windows, what we're talking about this week, please give us a call at 802-244-1777.
Or 877-291-8255.
In case somebody's still charging you a toll for long distance. But with that, we were leaving off on, before the last question, regarding the different types of frame materials and composition. We did talk a little bit about the vinyl windows and why, unless it's a UPVC frame, which means that the U stands for the ultraviolet protection, that is going to protect it against deformation or warping or whatever.
It's just a much more robust type of PVC.
Exactly. And, unless you're going that direction, I would try to say consider something else.
Yep.
Just, I know the price point's different, but still, it's going to be a better option by going with something else that's out there. I am a big fan of the fiberglass, just because of the robustness of that frame and how it's going to perform. It's also what you can consider like more of a thermally broken frame. What's the difference between thermally broken and thermally bridged? A thermally broken frame or thermally broken material doesn't mean it's a broken material. It means the pathway for conductive transfer of heat is broken. And that's what you want when we were talking about wall assemblies, different elements that are out there. You want to make sure that pathway is interrupted so that it doesn't, you can have great insulated glass, but if your actual window frame conducts the heat back and forth, it's going to bypass that really good glass. And so that's why you want to consider that when you're designing your home.
Now, one example of a thermally broken frame, when they're making wood frames, because the wood is not going to change in R value from the front wood, the outside wood and the inside wood. What they do is they'll, depending on the company, they often put in a piece of cork. You've got a frame, it's 2 inches or 2.5 inches wide. It's an inch on one side of wood, it's an inch on the other, and then a ½ inch of cork in between, which has a different thermal conductivity, much lower thermal conductivity. And that's the way to think about it. These thermally broken frames are just designed so that a metal frame, right? Metal frames, aluminum frames are the worst. Even if you have a thermally broken metal frame, the thermal break is not going to be significant enough to really make that window perform well. We see them a lot in commercial because they last forever and they don't mind throwing a lot of energy at a commercial building in order to keep it warm. But when we're talking about UPVC, PVC, the fiberglass, and the wood ones, those can be designed to have a real thermal break, which increases the U value, or the R value of the frame decreases the U value, and makes the frame more durable.
And, some of the older windows that are out there, of course, were wood framed, and they were actually material, usually an oak material derived from old growth lumber. And it was a really robust type, long lasting, durable type of frame material. But fast forward to today, we're growing these trees that usually grow to harvest within 15 to 20 years. And the cell structure is different. The disease resistance is totally different. And they're using these for the structure of the windows. Softwoods, exactly. And so what's happening is you get this assembly that people still want that nice wood look inside because it's warm, it's traditional. I get it. However, it's really fraught with some problems here. And let's just go into that a little bit. You can have a vinyl clad window. You can have an aluminum clad window or some type of cladding on the outside that seemingly is really robust. But the structure of the window is a softwood material, and what ends up happening so often, there's been so many lawsuits on this too over the years, just look up online if you want to, is where that cladding fails because of expansion and contraction and just being out in the elements for so long. The joints where you see that cladding come to a 45-degree corner, or as it's meeting the glass, it'll open up. The caulking will begin to fail. Caulking is not a good excuse for proper flashing in a proper drainage plane.
It's not the Band-Aid that everybody thinks it is.
Though it's used like that so often, and think, just caulk it. The adage is a case of caulking and a gallon of paint will make a carpenter what he ain't.
Also, just remember that a Band-Aid is put on top of a self-healing wound.
Yes.
And that's not happening with a window.
No, you're actually just masking the problem.
Right.
And so with that, what happens is behind the scenes, that what looks to be a really robust type of window, that cladding has a breach in it, and through capillary action, which is like basically a straw, if you will, the moisture is being sucked into that softwood material. And once you have it, approximately about 12 months of exposure of that moisture, it's going to rot that assembly. And so you'll go up to that window after a few years and it just starts to give and it's not performing and you're getting a lot of problems. The indoors can actually smell like mildew because it's happening. And it's just your whole assembly is going to have quite a bit of repairs. And so usually that doesn't happen in the first couple of years, but when it starts to happen, a lot of times the warranty is about expired or has expired on the windows and it's a little too late. Yeah. That's why having that type of assembly, I would basically make sure you're covered by a really robust warranty, not just a standard manufacturer's warranty, or you choose a different type of material. Yep. Here's another problem with that same type of window. We've talked about building science.
The clad windows.
Yes, the clad windows. Yep. And so with that, the building science doesn't lie. Physics is physics. And what happens is that whole vapor drive we talked about with your wall assemblies happens excessively on your windows as well. So you get that interior condensation where the window pane starts to get the dew on the window because it's a cold surface. You have warm, moisture-laden air on the inside of the assembly that hits that cold surface, and just like a nice cold glass of lemonade or iced tea on a summer day, it drops the moisture. Then that moisture runs down the assembly into the sash where it meets with some type of a wood product or another product and starts to work its way into that assembly. And when it does, it doesn't just discolor on the outside and create a little bit of mold. Oh, that doesn't look good, doesn't smell good. You can address the surface of it, but inside it's rotting out the assembly. So that's why you really need to choose your products carefully, because a window should last. Like I said, I've repaired 40-year-old windows. You have some of these old farmhouses that the windows have lasted, over 100 years, and you just need maintenance.
Not double pane.
Not double pane, but you can put a good storm window on there too and get better results than replacing everything. But that's why it's really important to choose your materials carefully and look at this when you are installing windows to take it down to the original framing. That way you can make sure things are right, things are tight, things are going to stay serviceable for a long time to come.
This is a recurring theme in our advice on window replacement. We are big fans of going the extra mile and checking out the wall around the building. We were talking about this last time we talked about windows. We had a friend's house who we were doing a job on, took the siding off, did not have in the original scope replacing the windows or the sheathing around the windows. We took the siding out, and the mustaching, right? If you look at the bottom of a window, rain spills out from a window on the left side and the right side at the bottom of the window, and that increases the moisture on the sheathing, and that's where we see rot. And so when we pulled the siding off, we weren't expecting to see it, but we actually did end up having to replace quite a lot of sheathing, and this is not the only time we've seen this. This is a pretty common problem. So if you're just going to replace the sash, right, with that replacement window that fits inside the original frame,
and keep your eyes closed.
Yeah, and you're never going to see all of these other issues, and
Exactly.
That's the moment to look.
Yeah, definitely. And so, when we're looking at new construction windows, some people will balk at the fact, as we try to talk them out of double hungs because people are so used to those. They say, but I still want that look. You can get a really great performing tilt and turn window, or you can get a nice casement window that seals pretty well, it performs well, and you can get bars or grills applied to it. I've done it for many of my customers to where it looks still like a double hung window,
Yep.
but it operates and seals better like a casement or the tilt and turn windows. So there are some of those options out there as well. And so with that, if you are going to put one of these windows in, having a nailing fin, which basically is your attachment point to the building, the window to the building, you got to make sure that that's sealed right. You have to follow the manufacturer's guidelines, but you want to make sure it's sealed right to the building and that you're using the right type of tape or adhesive to seal the actual flange so water intrusion doesn't happen. A lot of times it's a belt and suspender situation where you're caulking behind that flange and you're putting the tapes in front of it.
Yep.
But you got to be careful because
That does bring up a very interesting point, because Jim is basically saying if you're going to install a window, and that window is going to be what we call a proud installation, which means the frame basically goes all the way to the outside of the wall. Yes. that a nailing flange is a very standard way of getting that installed. However, with these thicker walls, we're now moving to an R25 for Arby's. These walls then have to be a 2x4 with 2 to 4 inches of foam on the outside to hit that R25 you're looking at. That means the better place to put the actual window may be in the middle of the wall, and that changes all the flashing and all of the trim, but is sometimes the best place for that window to be.
And that opens the door to even greater error.
Yep.
Because if you put it in the middle and someone says, well, I'll just put a simple extension jamb of some type of wood material or something, and not consider the flashing details. Well, I got more tape on it, or I got more caulking. Yep. That's going to fail. What you need to make sure is you have a properly established drainage plane to where it sloughs the water out of the house, out of the building, and allows it to dry. And when you're doing something like this, you want to make sure that you are using the proper type of sealants around the windows. We do like to do an assembly where the interior of the frame is using a minimally expanding foam, not the high expansion, because that can actually hourglass, if you will, or push in the sides of the trim and the frame to where it doesn't open and seal appropriately once you open it.
The high expansion foam is the mistake that a lot of people make.
Or they try
Get the blue stuff.
Yeah, the blue can. And so with that, when you put that in, you don't want to put it in all at once. So let's say you have a 6-inch depth on these newer windows, or even a 4-inch depth, and someone says, I'm just going to fill the whole thing and cut off the excess. If you do that, even the minimally expanding is going to have a problem with possibly pushing that in.
Yep.
And so you want to do it in what's called layers or lifts. Yep. And so you do a 1-inch lift or layer, go to the next window, and then the next and the next, and then come back and do it again. And that way it will cure appropriately, and you can get that sealed. But the foam does not solve all your issues. A true single-part foam cannot count as a proper air seal. Yep. And so what you want to do is use different type of adhesive tapes. Now, some of those tapes out there are basically a bituminous type of material or tar-based, and that's going to be a Vicor type tape. 3M makes a clear one. But you've got to make sure you're careful with this, too, because some vinyl window products do not marry well with some of these other products, and they actually deteriorate the frame. And you can actually end up causing these corrosive openings in the window frame, and water gets in where you use a material that was supposed to stop it from getting in. So some of these tapes that we're using now are really robust. They're an acrylic type tape, pressure sensitive, and they're vapor open at the same time. Yep. So if any moisture accumulates, not from bulk water moisture necessarily, but that could happen, but more so it's the condensation from inside to outside, or more the vapor drive from inside to outside is showing up. It allows it to dry, because that's, as Chris might
drying potential.
Yes, you always got to make sure your assembly has a pathway to dry, and that way it's going to work really effectively. And so using these types of tapes, if you have questions about these and how to do this appropriately and detail this, please send us an email. We'll be more than happy to help, because each window has its own little quirks. Because I even like to, on the sill, to put a piece of beveled siding, and you put the high point of the siding to the back, and then you allow that slope to happen towards the front, and set your window right on top of that after having it properly sealed. And then that, if any moisture does accumulate, it sloughs right to the outside by the ramp. The simple gravity will pull it to the outside, and that's a good way to seal that well. You also want to make sure your window taping and sealant is tied well into your weather-resistant barrier for an air seal, but also for the bulk water moisture from trying to get in. Yep. Otherwise, you can have some nice tape, but if there's any voids in that, it's going to quickly find a pathway the water will to get in into that assembly. And you want to make sure it's flashed right.
Detailing.
Exactly. So when it's flashed, because you're trying to make something that's going to last for decades, not just for until you sell your house 5 years later. And so with that, some manufacturers put a little bit of flashing on top of the head jamb of their unit. It could be a vinyl product, clear. It could be some other type of product. And we like to see, yes, flashing there, but once you put your trim up above the window, you want another piece of flashing on top of that to make sure that the water will be redirected away from the window assembly.
Instead of behind the trim.
And not sneaking behind the trim.
Yeah. We're going to put a diagram of exactly what Jim was talking about on the YouTube video that we're making of this episode. We are right up against the end of the show. It always goes so quickly.
It does.
I just want to throw out there again, we've gotten some more people who are interested in participating in our indoor air quality survey. We've got now 8 participants. We've got room for some more. So if you're interested, send us an email at thehousecallsvt@gmail.com. This is a program where we'll be sending out the indoor air quality monitor that we've purchased, and having our listeners have them in their bedrooms and do the door open, door closed thing to find out what levels of carbon dioxide are getting built up in the bedrooms. And when we're done with that in the spring, we'll be getting the results out to you. We are also hoping that you will get in touch with us if you have any problems or questions when we're not on the air. We're working towards, and that is, once again, that's housecallsvt@gmail.com, and we're still working on having a time and a call-in for our second hour of the week. We haven't programmed that yet, but hopefully in the next couple of weeks we'll be able to, maybe in February, start a second hour of helping you guys during the week.
Well, what I wanted to do is hopefully some of our sponsors are offering an end-of-the-year sale on a couple cans of free time, because I need some just to fit all this in. So if they're offering that, let us know, and I'm going to go buy a case of it for
Jim
sure.
is asking for a constitutional amendment to make the work week just one day longer.
And a 25th hour in the day.
There you go.
Of course, I might end up abusing that too. So we'll see where that goes.
Yeah,
But
it would have to have a special rule on it that Jim is not allowed to work during this extra hour.
But with that, we thank you so much for joining us, all the listeners out there, and the people who are also watching on the website and the YouTube channels and everything else. And keep engaged with us. Give us your questions. Send us. We are going to be doing some shows that are based solely on the questions that you offer. Even if we respond to them, we still want to get those great questions out there. So someone else is probably having the same question, and they just don't know how to ask it or what to ask exactly. And we're going to be addressing some of those topics. So please keep engaged once again with us. We really have enjoyed this and find it to be quite rewarding. And Chris, what was the actual website again, the YouTube channel that they can go to?
So if you want to get to our YouTube channel, I can't give you the actual address because it's like 17 letters and numbers. But if you go onto Google and you type in House Calls Vermont YouTube, it will pop up, and that's the easiest way to get there. We can also go to the homebuildersvt.com. We have a web page there that has the links. And until next week, this is Chris West.
And Jim Bradley for House Calls Vermont. See you next week.
See you next week.
House Calls Vermont this week brought to you by Hannon Home Center, Mason Drive in Waterbury, Shamrock Painting, painting and custom wood finishing, shamrockpaintingcompany.com. RK Miles, your neighborhood lumber yard with new locations in Barry, Montpelier, St. Johnsbury, and Waitsfield. Sticks and Stuff and Swanton Lumber with locations in St. Albans, Enosburg, Swanton, Derby, and Middlesex. Curtis Lumber. There's a Curtis Lumber near you. Find out where at curtislumber.com. Matt Clark's Northern Basement Solutions for all things basementy. northernnefoundations.com. Vermont Home Builders and Remodelers Association, homebuildersvt.com. And Poly Construction in South Burlington. One call does it all online at polyconstruction.com. Join us next Saturday at 12:30 for House Calls Vermont.